Faith is very important to me. Left swipe. Jesus is Lord. Left swipe. Faith, family. Left swipe. I am a woman of faith. Left swipe. I love her. God damn it. What? When did Tinder become so full of all of these Christian women? I don't know. Yeah, it's so weird. I mean, in a world where a dating app that was originally used for like anonymous no strings attached hookups can be flooded with Christians, I don't understand why there can be movies like the God's Not Dead films that seem to take place in this alternate universe where white conservative evangelical Christians are somehow this persecuted minority. I just don't understand how anybody could ever think that. Oh, hey, Dave. This is David Ayer White, who plays Pastor Dave. You know, Pastor D from the God's Not Dead movies. He's been staying with me for a little while because his church burned down. This gets a little creepy. Keeps telling me how people love to get the old D from him, and apparently bro jobs aren't forbidden by the Bible. That's a bit weird. So, it's that time again where we have another God's Not Dead movie. Now, if you're not well versed in these movies, they do seem to take place in an alternate universe where Christians are a persecuted minority, and how there's all of these great and powerful secular interests in Arkansas that are stopping Christians from exercising their right to practice their belief system. And they're horrible movies. The first two are really horrible. So I find out a third one's coming out, which was set up by the end credit stinger of God's Not Dead 2 to, expand the Pure Flick Cinematic Universe, or the PCU. Wait. Let's be frank. A lot has changed since the last God's Not Dead film. It's been 2 years since that movie came out, and, 2016 was a bit different. There was an election going on, and, since then, the evangelical right has decided to buy into Donald Trump, a thrice-married porn star fucking and covering up horrible human being. And some evangelicals seem to excuse this by saying, oh, he's like King David, who raped that woman in the bathtub. Or he's like, Cyril or Cecil, I always forget, but the non-religious character in the Bible who is still used as a vessel for God. An omnipotent super being needs Donald Trump in order to cut taxes for the rich and harass immigrants and minorities. I don't know. So, but since the last God's Not Dead film, we have this third film, and it has different writers and a different director. And boy, can you fucking tell. I'm kind of tired of propping you up here. God's Not Dead 3, A Light in Darkness, which I keep wanting to call A Light in the Darkness. So, the last religious film that I reviewed was Samson, also by PureFlix, David Ayer White's Christian movie studio that he has for these bad movies. Since then, other religious movies have come out. I Can Only Imagine, and Paul, Apostle of Christ, which I didn't bother to go see, mainly because I heard that instead of being offensive or laughably bad, that they were just kind of boring. But, I got this little guitar pick here, and they were giving away these little like notebooks, which I guess you can just use for anything. So I drew a dick in mine. Figured that's... What quote's on that page anyway? If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. Kind of fits. But, even with Samson, that was just a laughably bad movie. It wasn't reprehensible, really. In fact, I'd have to go back to Let There Be Light for a Christian movie that I actually went to see that was really, really reprehensible. But I figured, you know what? The God's Not Dead series have put so much mean-spirited hate into the public ethos that it would at least be fun to watch in hate. Well, I was wrong, because it's very clear that with different writers and a different director, that these people, unlike Harold Kronk and the writers of the first two, read the bad reviews of the first two, and they seem to have taken that to heart. And so we have A God's Not Dead Part 3 that seems like it wants to kind of undo some of the damage that the first two movies did and acknowledge their shortcomings, but it's a little too late. Now, I mentioned the whole alternate universe thing because alternate universes are briefly brought up in this movie. We're introduced to four college kids. This takes place on the same college that God's Not Dead 1 took place. It's a fictitious public university. And we got there's this black guy, there's his white girlfriend, and then we have this other guy, I think his name's Alex, and he has the most disturbingly weird eyebrows that I've seen on an actor in quite some time. I couldn't decide if they were drawn on or tattooed on, or if this actor has just had facial reconstruction surgery, or he was burned badly and this was the best they could do, but he has the most disturbing eyebrows that made me cringe every time he was on screen. And his girlfriend. So, eyebrow guy and his girlfriend, they don't seem to be full-on atheists. He seems to mainly just have some issues with religion from growing up, and she is struggling with faith. The other two are just sort of straw man, young, not very bright, but pretentious liberal intellectuals. And they're having a conversation in this dorm room about the Mandela effect. You know, that thing about people misremembering Berenstein's Bears spelling and things like that. And at one point, one of the characters is like, alternate universes, man, it's science. So it's like, all right, so you're gonna straw man intellectual, liberal, irreligious youths by making them sound stupid as if thinking the Mandela effect is science? So, alright. At least this movie doesn't straw man as badly as Kevin Sorbo in Part 1 or Ray Wise in Part 2, who are practically frothing hell beasts in those movies. But it would be kind of interesting on a multiverse theory, because the God's Not Dead movies do take place in this weird universe where there can be, at any given time, just armies of atheist protesters in Arkansas, and it's really weird. But maybe I should just start where this movie starts. So, at the end of the last movie, Pastor D, he's arrested for not handing over his sermons, and Part 2 misrepresented the real-life case that this was kind of based on, which is basically that if churches want to be tax-exempt, then they can't push forward a specific political belief. So they were trying to get the sermons to see if they were doing that so that their tax-exempt status could be ripped away. But they weren't going to close down the church or arrest anybody or anything like that. It was merely about, I think it's called the Hyde Amendment. But anyway, that's resolved, quickly. The movie opens with him in prison, and then he's released from prison, and then he gives, an interview about, the one truth is God, and then it just cuts to some talking heads, and it's like, how can he say that? It's like, well, he's a pastor. What do you fucking expect the guy to say? So, he's released with, his Ugandan bromance guy, Jude. The guy who's always, doing the crossword puzzles and all that crap. And they go to their church, which is privately owned by them, but it's still in the middle of this public university campus. Apparently, it hadn't been a public university all the time. The church has been there for 100 plus years or whatever. So there's still this big brouhaha on campus where the college, the administration board, who are led by Ted McGinley, who used to play Jefferson Darcy on Married with Children, so it's very weird to see that now all he does is these Christian movies like Do You Believe in This? And Tatum O'Neal, Child Wunderkind from Paper Moon, or Paper Noon, I always forget those. One is like a Talented Mr. Ripley one, and another one's about a child grifter. Weird to see her in this movie, too. And they don't like the controversy. They think it's driving away prospective students, so admissions are down, and they're losing money and all that stuff. So they hatch a plan to take control of the church using eminent domain. Now, the movie name-checks a couple of eminent domain cases like this against churches. Basically, as long as it's not the government attempting to shut down a religious building or religious church or mosque or whatever, specifically to infringe on religion, like they're not targeting them because they're a religious site, then it seems like the government can just do eminent domain fine. The cases mentioned in the movie were more about just sort of tracts of land. Like there was one case where I guess there had been a town referendum, and they had voted to allow the town to buy these certain plots of land to build some stuff for the public good. And the guy who owned this land didn't want to agree to the price that the government was, so he ended up selling for a higher price to a local church. But then the church's plot was in the middle of the state's plot, so the state was going around the church to get eminent domain for that part, but it wasn't like they wanted to fucking bulldoze the church because they were tired of religious controversy or anything. Apples, oranges. But that's sort of the plot of this movie, where it's about the church, the college administrators want to take eminent domain and take care of the church, and Pastor Dave doesn't want to leave his church and all that stuff, and that sort of gets the give and take, which is a lot different than the first movie where a philosophy class is dealt with like no realistic philosophy class ever is, and the philosophy teacher doesn't know the difference between a philosophical argument and just argument from authority. Or the second movie, which is the most inaccurate legal drama I have ever seen ever. At least this one seems to get its law mostly right and doesn't have any straight away intellectually reprehensible things about it, at least as far as the main plot or the main theory. But basically back to, we stay on with Pastor Dave, and, he flirts with this girl who runs, the soup kitchen ministry thing, and he talks about waffles with his bromance friend. And then, one night, they keep talking about how they need, armed guards for the church because people are, protesting outside of it, which, come on. Aside from, counter-protesters to the Westboro Baptist Church, you never see, rabid atheists just picket signing out in front of a church, but in this universe that happens. So, they have to hire armed guards to protect the church and the parishioners and all that bullshit. So then one night they're leaving, and they hear glass breaking, and the alarm on the church goes off, and someone has thrown a brick through the window of the church. And it's gone into the basement, and it's hit a gas line, and it also seems to hit the light bulb, so you have a shattered light bulb and you have gas. So Pastor Jude, Ugandan guy, goes down to the basement, and I don't think the director meant for this to be a POV shot, but if it is, it makes the character look really stupid, but it pans to the brick on the floor, pans to the gas leak pipe, and then pans to the light bulb, which is broken, and then either Pastor Jude is a fucking moron or he's committing suicide, but he decides to turn on the broken light bulb, causes fire, church starts to get into flames, with really bad CGI flame work, by the way. And I don't know what happens to Jude, because he's not burned. And some of the already broken glass breaks more, so maybe that cuts him. But later, Pastor Dave is able to run in, he pulls him out from the basement and outside the church, and then the guy dies. And I'm like, how? He wasn't burned. I don't believe the glass cut him hard enough for him to bleed out. Was it smoke inhalation? Because then David Ayer White should have gotten smoke inhalation too. So it doesn't make sense that he's dead. But the movie wants it to be the sad moment where he's cradling Jude in his arms, and then Jude says a phrase in his African language
which we later find out is his catchphrase about God is good all the time and all that bullshit. But I can only remember that in the first movie, Jude was cradling Kevin Sorbo, and then Kevin Sorbo dies, and then the pastors are both like laughing and celebrating, and then they go to a fucking Newsboys concert. So, given how they celebrate the death of this atheist because he's been turned at the last minute and they can pull out a victory, I can't really feel bad about this guy dying. Especially because, you know, usually it's horror movies where the black guy dies first, but apparently also in Pure Flicks they have to do this too. So they take the supporting character and they just... I don't know. And yeah, the movie at one point brings up the problem of evil philosophical argument and like dismisses it as just sort of like didactic and childish, but these movies have never quite dealt with that. Like in the second movie where the David A.R. White character gets like massive food poisoning and has to get off that jury, like a lot of bad shit. Well, in the first movie it's just that his car won't start because he's not faithful enough. But a lot of bad shit happens to this pastor and they never quite answer the question of why does God let this happen? Like, even within the constrained universe of these movies, it never really gives a good answer to that. Anyway. So then, after that whole thing, he dies, the movie gives, like, a title card of 12 hours earlier, and then we come back to Eyebrow Guy. And then, long story short, Eyebrow Guy is a lot more atheistic than his girlfriend, who is still struggling. The girlfriend gets upset when he kind of teases her in front of the friends about struggling, and so she decides, like, she says something along the lines of, like, we should kind of take a break. It's kind of like a soft breakup. So he's mad at that. He blames the church. He's like walking by the church, and he's like kicking leftover protest signs, like, "Arr!" And then his friends leave, and he's alone in front of the church. He sees the sign that says, like, everyone welcome. He's like, fuck that, and then he picks up spray paint that was also left by protesters that no one picked up, and he sprays an X on that sign. And then he finds the most perfectly laid, undisturbed, unbroken, loose brick. Like so perfect it looks like you just bought it at the Home Depot or the Habitat for Humanity surplus store. And that's when he tosses it through the window and he's chased away. So we find out that, hey, this kid who's upset about his girlfriend rejecting him has committed manslaughter. So, like, oh, okay. And throughout the movie, we sort of get this girl struggling with her faith, but we know she's going to end up Jesus-y because none of these movies can allow an atheist to just kind of be an atheist and be cool with that. No, everyone has to be converted or die. Even some people who are already Jesus-y have to die, so that other characters can come to Jesus, I guess. It's like, I will turn everyone Christian, it don't matter how many supporting characters we have to kill. So... yeah, she ends up going to, like, another, like, youth Christian group, I guess, and it's run by Josh Wheaton, which they never changed that name. But he was missing from the second movie, but he was the protagonist of the first movie, and I guess he was missing from the second movie because he was off at law school, and then he decided to drop out of law school and be a youth pastor. Okay. And at one point later in the movie, somebody asks, like, what were you in law school for? He was like, to be a civil rights lawyer. And the guy's like, oh, well, you don't seem like a liberal to me. And he's like, Jesus was the first social justice warrior. And I'm like, first of all, no person who is actually fighting for civil rights and stuff calls himself a social justice warrior. That's just a slur from, like, alt-right people who hate Tumblr on Reddit. Like, SJWs. Like, no one actually attaches that label to themselves. But anyway, it's one of the tone-deaf issues of these movies. So, and he sort of tries to talk the girl kind of through it, and he kind of pops up here and there in the movie, but there's not really much there, except that people were wondering where it was in the second movie. So anyway, it comes down to Ted McGinley. Jefferson Darcy he's friends with Pastor Dave, but he's still going along with the other college administrators and gives him the eminent domain offer, or the buyout offer. Pastor Dave's like, I'm not selling my church, even though it burned down now. So he ends up driving to Chicago, and there's, luckily in the middle of Arkansas, there's a helpful Chicago 300 miles away sign. He drives to Chicago, and he meets his brother. And his brother is played by John Corbett. John Corbett was in a recent Christian football movie, so I guess he's a Christian. Like, Christian enough to be in this movie. But mostly I remember him from Sex of the City, and he's done like real movies, not just Christian movies. And honestly, John Corbett is the best thing about this movie. I mean, for a series of movies that has had really bad acting, either really bad acting, like Melissa Joan Hart in the second one, or everyone in the first one, or just really over-the-top acting, like Ray Wise in the second one. Gods Not Dead 3 actually has the strongest acting of the whole series, and John Corbett stands away. He plays his character really well. He actually gives what I would actually consider a good performance in the movie. And for a Gods Not Dead movie to have a performance that's good from anybody is honestly astounding. So he's a civil rights lawyer in Chicago. If he's not a full-on atheist, because the movie never quite makes it clear, he's certainly not the biggest friend of religion, doesn't particularly like religion. And that's another thing about these God's Not Dead movies. These movies don't believe that there's people who genuinely don't believe in God. They just assume there's only religious people and people who are angry at religion and call themselves atheists. Just like Kevin Sorbo was just angry at God because his family died, or his mother or son. I confused his character in that with Let There Be Light. Or they're just like angry people like Ray Wise, like their primitive belief system and everything. I mean, I take cheap shots at religion all the time. I drew a dick in the book. But not every atheist is just like foaming at the mouth at the mention of Christianity. I'll just be like, fucking Chick-fil-A. And I'll make jokes about, I wish we could feed Christians to the lions, and I'll make my little communion wafer video. But honestly, no one's like that 24/7. Maybe Sam Harris. So... just because he's the older brother, the John Corbett character is like, sure, I'll help you with your little eminent domain thing, so they go back to Arkansas. Even though John Corbett is a fairly likable character throughout this whole movie, and he is one of the non-religious characters of the movie, at least until the end, because the movie has to always imply that they're always going to be Christian. He is pretty likable, but they still have to slur him by saying that he's been divorced 3 times and all this stuff. They can't make him an okay character. Every liberal or atheist in the God's Not Dead universe has to be treated the way that right-wing religious people are treated in Far Cry 5. This movie does cut out the cancer girl from the second one and the Asian guy. He might be in the church in one extra scene. But for the most part, the wider supporting characters of these movies, they fall by the wayside just for Pastor Dave and Josh Wheaton. So basically the movie's mostly just about this sort of back and forth between the college and the pastor. And then... later on in the movie, Pastor Dave finds out about who threw the brick, and they get into a little scuffle and altercation. At one point, I guess some Christians throw a brick through Ted McGinley's window, and so he goes and punches David A.R. White. So there's a little altercation there. But for the most part, there's not much to talk about in this movie. Whereas the first 2 I could talk about forever because of how ineptly made and how intellectually and morally reprehensible they are, this movie just seems to be trying to fix the damage while still playing to the same audience. Because when all's said and done, what this movie is on a surface level attempting to argue is that there's a lot of animosity going on with politics and religion versus secularism and all this stuff. So if everybody just sort of calmed down, listened to each other, compromised, and if Christians were more about love than anger and taking out their anger, that we might get more resolved. And in and of itself, as just a basic surface message, even if I disagree with the characterization that all of the horrible Christians who do horrible things politically in Jesus' name are the minority of Christians. I don't necessarily agree with that. Even if they're not, lobbying against climate change or whatever, they're still voting for people like Trump and your Ted Cruz's and your Rick Santorums. Even if I disagree with that, then that simple basic message of, like, instead of cherry picking the shitty parts of the Bible, they should continue cherry picking the good parts about the New Testament. It's still a little too late coming from how hateful and vindictive and poisonous the first two movies were. Like, if this movie wanted to make the surface message that it makes, it probably should not have been a God's Not Dead movie. It probably should have been called something else, even if it had some overlapping characters. Or I mean, David Arroway could basically play the same character and they just call him something else, and they could have called this movie something else. But by putting it within that franchise, it's like, you've already done the damage. It's, you know, it's a little too late to suddenly reverse course and try to play the big man here. So, that was basically the main problem I had with this. I mean, yeah, there is some stupid stuff about, like, there's the social justice warrior comment, and there's some other back and forths about, I disagree with them calling Christianity about peace and everything, but basically, I'd say God's Not Dead 3 is the New Testament to Part 1 and 2's Old Testament, where there's far less objectionable stuff in the New Testament than in the Old Testament. But there's still objectionable stuff in there, and it still sucks and is wrong. like even if you just take out like Luke 19:27 and all of the not very morally defensible stuff in the New Testament, it's still a story that I don't believe historically happened. And there's these movies can never quite parse people who might not care one way or the other, or have an emotion pro or negative about religion but simply don't believe in it, or factual arguments or anything like that. These movies can't divorce themselves from the emotions of either love or hate or anything. And that's sort of the basic problem. That, and this movie's kind of boring. It's just, I mean, without having a story that's very compelling, without having any real emotion. I mean, it's better directed than the other two movies, but it feels very inert, and it's just not very good. And it's still attempting. It's like you can't take the audience that was fired up with the Islamophobia and the anti-science and the Duck Dynasty love and all that stuff from the first two movies, and then try to turn around and say, like, we're going to be the bigger person, you should join with us on it. You're just a little too late on that one. And then you still can't let your atheist characters stay atheists. You couldn't let John Corbett just be kind of a nice brother who has some issues with religion but is still going to help out because he's not a dick and he loves his brother. You still have to have him opening that family Bible and be like, maybe, now that things are resolved. And I don't know. There's still some unintentionally funny scenes. Pastor Dave and Pastor Jude still have this homoerotic thing going on, but the movie tries to pass it off as they're like surrogate brothers. There's a scene where Pastor Dave's girlfriend takes him out into the woods and lights a candle, and all I could think about in that scene is that this scene is really laying on that she wants the Pastor DD. I wish I had more to talk about. Like, I wrote very long reviews of the first two movies because they were just awful, like, indefensible garbage, like a straight, like, F letter grade. This one's just kind of boring. It's boring, and it's kind of rich and hypocritical to have its surface message while the first two movies had their message. But that's what happens when you bring in a new writer and a new director who obviously they're probably more along the lines of the live and let live and let's kumbaya Christian, as opposed to the Rick Santorum, Ted Cruz, basic Republican Christian. But in the United States of America right now in 2018, where so-called self-identified Christians are still getting their conspiracy theories from Fox News, and they're insulting survivors of a mass shooting, and they're still supporting Trump no matter how many immoral garbage things he does because they think he can stop abortion or some bullshit, or stack the Supreme Court. So they're basically being pragmatic about their aims. You can't come out and say you're going to play the bigger man. Like, even when this movie and Pastor Dave gives up his eminent domain clause and is like, you can take down the church and build a student center and I'll build my other church on my own land and we'll have a compromise here. because I'll be the bigger person. It's like, Pastor Dave, fuck you. You weren't the bigger person in the last two movies. You were just a firebrand fucking asshole. I don't know. So, I'm disappointed because I really wanted to come out here and be like I was with Let There Be Light, but there's not much to get worked up about this one. It's not as horrible as the first two. It's just not a good movie. But John Corbett's good. Good performance by him. That's all I got.